Well, they hit the big go live and all the things
Great.
related.
Last word, Jill, it reminds me.
And so now we can introduce Dr. Heller speaking on the Wheel of Fortune.
The connection of Netzach and Hesed. And that is the 21st path, and associated with it is a very interesting and somewhat more abstract design called the Wheel of Fortune, Rota Fortunae, the 10th Arcanum. The Hebrew letter is Kaf, meaning a curve or a closed hand, the hand in action, and the astrological attribution is Jupiter, the lord of greater fortune, and a very kind of beneficent sort of a planet. In fact, you might say astrologically that we are moving from Netzach, to which Venus is attributed, which is the lesser fortune, to the greater fortune. Well, it's all fortune, and therefore we are fortunate indeed. And what we have here is a wheel, which is surrounded by the beasts of the four elements, of earth, water, fire, and air in the corners, which sort of, we encountered that with the universe. They were up there. But in the universe there was the oval through which we moved, and here now we see the wheel which turns. And it has the letters T-A-R-O, T, which could be tarot, but if we start with the R, then it is rota, which means in Latin the wheel of fortune. And on it we have some creatures descending. In this deck we have a serpent descending and an Anubis, the jackal-headed Anubis ascending, and the Sphinx sits on top. So what we have here is the turning of the wheel, which, however, while it is fortunate, is no longer fortuitous. This is not a tarot Kabbalistic Las Vegas. It's not that kind of a wheel, but it is rather the way in which, let's say, fate itself becomes spiritualized. And when we are up in these spiritual worlds, then fate is no longer, just like justice is not blind, fate is not blind, but rather it will move in the direction of our spiritual development. Now we have to remember that that's not everywhere and not automatic. It accompanies an intense spiritual process. So when you are not involved in such an intense spiritual process, then just to sit back with this kind of New Age Pollyanna optimism and say, oh, everything is for the best, everything is wonderful, and everything serves a great and wonderful purpose. What's the answer to that? Balderdash, which you may have to look up in the dictionary, but it's a good word. Not everything is for the best. Far from it. There are terrible things, there are horrible things, and they are not good, and you can't make them good. But the issue is, when you are on the right track, when you are involved in an intense spiritual process such as here, then the wheel of fate begins to bring things to you that are conducive to your spiritual objectives. What do you think these Kabbalistic synchronicities are all about? Like the one I mentioned before with the hermit and so forth. The wheel brings these things to you to point out certain things, to intensify your own insight, to vitalize your own soul. That's what the wheel brings. And then the wheel of fate is quite an important and quite a wonderful thing.
Okay, so looking at the Wheel of Fortune, this is just chock full of all these different symbols. Dr. Heller mentioned the fixed signs of the zodiac indicating the elements with Taurus and Leo, and the elevated aspect of Scorpio, which is the eagle, and then Aquarius there with their books. So this often, this will come up for me oftentimes when there's some big learning experience or when you're embarking upon studies and things like that. In the divinatory position, let's say as a summary of a reading, then we're dealing with something which is, it's kind of like, well, the wheel is coming around. This is coming around. It's going around. This is what you might expect based on what your past experiences are. Or this might be a really lucky break, you know, so you can kind of go either way in terms of the ideas behind fortune and fortuitous that Dr. Heller had mentioned. If this were indicated against, then and I had a reading just like this the other day, and it was like, you know, well, let's have some advice in my career. And this was in the against place. I'm like, do not gamble. You know, if you, the pro position was the emperor and the advice against position was the wheel of fortune. So I was like, you know, you need to be prudent, be conservative, and don't just go thinking it's going to be fantastic, whatever you do, or that the joy that you get from gambling is going to be its own reward, because you're not necessarily going to get the money, you know, so you better just be satisfied with the play. In terms of in a pro position, actually not that different, but in this case, you can expect an interesting result. It might be a good result, but it's going to be something that will represent a change, a fairly significant, like a qualitative change versus a quantitative change, but perhaps not as much as the tower. In this case, it would just be like, oh, a turn of events, or, oh, interesting, or something kind of those chickens coming home to roost. I look forward to other people's interpretations, because this one sometimes I find myself can be too shallow because I don't know exactly how to interpret it more deeply, but this often does come up with people who are in studies and doing learning, and those books are very reminiscent or resonant with that idea of learning more, and then what is that going to bring? So like Dr. Heller indicated, that it brings you the things that you are ready for if you are embarking on the journey. So it's kind of like you're meeting halfway. Magnus, can I hand off to you?
Thank you, Alison. I think also this has to do with development and change, and I think it's a difficult card to read because it can mean so many different things. But my experience with it is that it shows a change of the present situation to another situation. And that is, if the present situation is very good, it could indicate that there will be a downfall in some way. And if it is very bad, and the person asking, will my situation be better? The answer is often yes, because you have sown the seed that will make it better. Because this has to do with the seed that has been sown and that is growing. So it's also a card for growing in a process, and it's a spiritual process, I believe. I think it doesn't indicate the Las Vegas wheel and so on that we have heard. And it's also an interesting card because it's a deep in this card, and I have done a meditation on it several times, and we see the wheel as this is turning around, but if you look in the middle of the wheel, it is like you are dropping a drop of water in water, and you have all the rings forming. So there are two movements in this card. And then there is the symbols inside, that is salt and mercury and sulfur. That is the tria prima in the alchemy, the three elements there. That is in the upper part of something. And the fourth element is earth then. So it's there, and you also have the 4 elements that the cardinal points that Alison was talking about. So it is again, it is the 4 and the 3 also that is hidden inside there. So it's an interesting card. And as Yeriel, I have read in the Wang book, and he is hinting about the drop and the water, but he is not telling. He talks about a story about Oedipus that Yeriel perhaps can tell later, but it is the Sphinx that is asking a question, and the answer is right, and the Sphinx is plumping in the water. And there you have that symbology that the water is in this card in some way. That's plumbing in the water is the rings in the water that is in the middle of the wheel. So it's like the wheel is both turning, and it also vibrates from inside, from outside. It's like we see a spiral in the middle of the wheel, actually, that we don't see. And I think it's an interesting card, and I think you have to look at the card that is around to see what it really means. And also there is the colors there, the blue for the Sephira, the 4th Sephira with the Jupiterian, the Jupiter energy. And also it is the red for the Gebura, the Mars energy is also inside there with the Anubis symbol there. I think all should read in the Wang book, because it's very interesting what is written there about this card. And I will hand it over to Angela.
Well, thank you. I honestly don't have any comment because I'm learning, but thank you. Yeah, I'm just taking in what everybody's saying because, yeah, I'm just not familiar. I don't have any experience reading for other people. So, but thank you. Thank you anyway. I'll pass it on to Jeriel.
And Jeriel will unmute, and then he will start over. Or did we lose him?
I'm here, but I hit the wrong button, and it's taken away my view of the screen. And it would be nice if I could get it to come back. Here, maybe.
You muted yourself again.
Perhaps while Jerry is working on that, Lana or Ala, do you have some things to share?
I think I'll share some. You know, whenever I see this card, and it actually came up for me recently, you know, I always pause and think, who is the author of my life? Who writes my story? To me, this is free will versus karma. You know, the wheel can go either way. It can go backwards or it can go forward. But what I'm taking from this is being in the moment and perhaps learning from your past, because everything in this world is cyclical. And depending on the context, you know, from astrological point of view, you know, there are transits, you know, there are transformation that we're going through, there are cycles that we go through, and looking back and see what was happening in the previous cycle, and kind of making, mistakes and learning from your mistakes, and going forward, So I think it's very interesting. It's a very complicated symbol, and but the main thing, who is in control, and if there is a control. I think that's all I have. And it looks like Jeriel is on.
I'm back again now. All right. Wow. This card, I think that it represents all of the esoteric traditions. The tarot, of course, as Dr. Heller pointed out, is Taro and Rota for the wheel. One of the things he didn't point out was that the other 4 symbols on the outer rim of that are the Tetragrammaton, the name of God, the ineffable name, and so that evokes that Jewish tradition. The thing in the middle, also those 4 things are the astrological eras that have the equinoxes and the solstices. So they're the segments of the year. So it's time passing. We have the alchemical symbols, the 4 animals. This is from Ezekiel's vision in the Bible. We're going to see them again in the world card at the end. Here we see them in their most idealistic form. They have angels' wings, each one of them. And then I think the books are significant. To me, one of the main things that the books are saying is to use any of these traditions, you should study them. And another thing that they are, I understand from my reading, that these 4 are also related to the 4 gospels. So the books are a reference to that as well. So Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. So they bring in the Christian. We have the little red devilly looking fellow here, that Dr. Heller mentioned as well. So we have the Egyptian mythology, and of course the mysterious the mystery of it all, represented by the Sphinx, and he's holding the sword, which again tells us to be keeping in mind that our intelligence, our rationality is an important thing to be able to understand all of this. The wheel thing, we were talking a good deal last time about karma and reincarnation, and karma and reincarnation are in most esoteric traditions called the wheel, and that the ultimate goal in Hinduism, Buddhism, that kind of thing, is to get off the wheel of reincarnation by going to a higher spiritual plane. I think we're all a long way from that, but that's part of the overall view of the process. I do think that it can mean, in reading it, luck, but it is things are happening. Whatever is the status quo right now isn't going to be the status quo. The next time around, it's like there's one of my favorite little metaphors is the merry-go-round with the gold ring that you can catch as you're going around it, you know, which gets you some sort of special prize, like another ride on the merry-go-round. But one of the things that's neat about it is each time you go around, you have a chance to catch that ring. And so if you miss it this time, maybe you'll get it the next time. So I think that it has to do with how are you reacting to the way that life is treating you, and don't let yourself get down by your failures or your disappointments. But don't also think that your good fortune is something that's just yours by divine right. It can disappear as soon as it can appear. I thought it was an interesting thing I read in Rachel Pollack's book, The 78 Degrees of Wisdom. She talks about ancient ceremonies in very early civilizations where this is shown with a king on the top, and there would be an annual celebration where the wheel will have turned and the king is now on the bottom being crushed by the wheel rather than ruling it, which again is a reference, as she explains, to you know, what's up now will be down later. This is also a teaching that is very much present in Masonic teaching. That the wheel keeps going around, and you're going to have good fortune, you're going to have bad fortune, but something is at play, I think, when this shows up in a reading. And it was already observed that, like many cards, especially the majors, the cards around them are the hint to what that actually is. But being able to deal with whatever it is that life gives us, and to make the best of it, and to have a positive attitude, I think is a lot of the message. And when it's in the inverted or the advice against, we have another version of our look before you leap. Don't take things for granted, and remember that sword up there. Use your brain, and even what all of us have said here, I think, just barely scratches the surface of this incredible card. And I will be quiet now and pass it off to Alla.
Thank you, Gerald. You know, it is a fascinating card, and I was looking at the letters, and then what caught my attention is the arrow pointing at A. So it could be tarot, rota, or arot, which I don't know what it means. That caught my attention. Also, I look at rota. I looked at the dictionary, what it means, and it means register, clerk, and so forth, all different words. And that made me think about all these books, all these creatures sitting in four corners. That made me think that everything is registered, everything that we do, think, everything is registered somewhere. And it looks like each of those creatures holds the book of our lives, or whoever is the person who is read for. And one more thing that caught my attention is that this, that the red one. It's no matter what happened in our lives, we still are being supported, bad or good. There is still support for us. That's it. Michael, you're next.
I absolutely love this card whenever it pops up, and it has a lot of personal meaning for me. But I see a lot of the universe card reflected in this card, and 10 being connected to the, and I'm going to mispronounce this terribly, tetratychs, the Plato's numeral system, the 10. You have 1, 2, 3, 4, equaling 10, the ultimate number. I definitely see that in this card. The 8 spokes of the wheel are like the Eightfold Path of Buddhism. Very important and very useful. I think this card is, in reflection, is always nice to think about, how your own life turns and how the wheel turns in your own destiny, and what you do have control of and what you don't have control of. I like what Magnus said about the outside of the wheel going to the inside of the wheel. On the outside of the wheel, it may spin a lot faster than it does spin in the inside of the wheel. It's interesting that the spoke of those 8 points is right in that center. Maybe that's, where we can kind of control ourselves, by being in the center of the wheel and understanding that. In Cavendish's book, which I put in the document, and I really recommend, he had an interesting quote. There was a French abbot. The Wheel of Fortune is an ancient symbol, but he had a French abbot put a mechanical wheel in his monastery, and the quote was, "That as monks might ever before." Excuse me. Let me read it quite from it. "That as monks might ever have before them the spectacle of human vicissitudes." So I thought that was a great quote. Like, not only can our fate, bring us to great heights, but it also can bring us to great depths, which is what we see in this. Another thing that's interesting, if we do Hebrew numerology for all the letters in the center, it actually equals to 697, which then, if you reduce that down using the Platonic method, is 22. So again, kind of that whole universe being in the card. So great card. When I see it, divination wise, something's going to change. Something's going to be world shaking or world turning. But how we go through it and how we respond to it, I think, is really the lesson of this card. I think even if our fate deals us a bad hand, sometimes that lower part of the wheel is necessary for success. So, has anybody not gone yet? Christina, have you gone? Go ahead.
Okay, I just wanted to add a couple of things. The 10 on the top is usually associated to completion, that the karma, and I see this card as karma, that we completed a karma we completed a cycle, whether it's on a past life or this life. We're reaping the just wages, and this is associated to the Justice card. That this is a good card because it's emphasizing that, okay, we paid our dues, whether they're good or not in our mind, we completed it, we took care of it, and there's movement. And if you're involved in a project, that to keep your intent on what you want to bring in new, because something is new can begin, can come in. Just be conscious of the newness you want to bring in. I made a note on Oh, the sword, invoking spirit. So when you're keeping that intent, make it as a spiritual intent, you know, make sure that it's a higher intent. So yeah, that's it. Brian?
Well, it's been a few interesting comments that I think are especially appropriate for this card, that the context of a reading will really, as always, but maybe especially with this card, help in the intuition to know what to see in the card. But from our discussion, I'm kind of just thinking of the unrelenting turn of the clock, the march of time, and although it doesn't really have much divinatory meaning, perhaps, but the the ongoing scroll of recorded time in the linear way that we experience it was pointed out, and I kind of like that idea, because time does collect a version of reality. It's ascribed that where pretty much I'd say all of anything that we can remember is really done not through memories being stored in brain cells or something like that, according to my little upcoming book thesis, but that it becomes a reality that lives in a realm that we have a sometimes tenuous and sometimes very strong connection to. But yeah, as a divinatory card, it does say that there's a constant movement, and it's probably about choosing when to make a move, or to just stop waiting, perhaps. But I do have to go ahead and chime in on the tarot. If you start with the T at 12 o'clock and end with the T at 12 o'clock, you get tarot, the full word. So that's just a little fun thing I noticed. We always notice so many things when we're looking at these beautifully blown up images, but that is the problem for exploring these cards in the void, in the one at a time void, outside of the context of a reading, which is where the intuition really can glue together the gathered cohesive meaning into one big picture. And so it's a very flexible card, but then they all really are. But this one perhaps much more than average. And I think I will turn it over to the general discussion.
I wanted to add what keeps popping up when I'm just seeing this. It never has before, where it reminds me of, I read a passage on one of Steiner's books. He says that when we die, we're going to be surprised to see the Christ and the devil standing side by side. And I don't know why, but it keeps popping up right now, and it's never done that before for me. And it's supposed to be a good sign. We see the both of them standing by, because we both need that. We both need those energies. But anyway, I don't know why it just pops up. Okay.
I wonder if anybody has insight into the coloration. The Sphinx in particular is blue, which is interesting. And then you had mentioned the primary colors last time, Magnus. I'm noticing that
Yes.
the Sphinx is blue, the Anubis is red, and the snake is yellow.
Yeah.
Is it some aspect of wholeness or something along those
Yes, yes. Probably it's the color in the second triangle in the tree.
Yeah.
So it's the blue and the red and the yellow.
Isn't this on the path between Hesed and Netza?
Yes, yes, it is.
So that blue could also be the color from Hesed too.
Yes, that was what I said of the
Yeah.
swings there.
Yeah.
It could be, but it could also be that the color in the card is the in that triangle of the tree. Could be both. But there is also a lot of yellow, gold yellow, so it's a lot of Tiferet there also. Both the snake and all the animals on the clouds.
And I think that speaks to, how the wheel is the sun in a
Yes,
old
yes.
symbology. So,
Yeah.
I think that's
And the snake is quite interesting because it goes from within and without. You see the deep if you are looking at the snake. It's not curling around the wheel, I believe. It's coming from some deep and then out.
In Waite's pictorial guide to the tarot, or whatever the name of that is, he says the snake is the legendary serpent monster Typhon, and appears on the card with his head downward to show the negative aspects of fate. And of course, the other guy, the god Anubis, the jackal-headed god in Egyptian mythology, rules the afterlife and oversees the ritual of mummification, which is a big deal in Egyptian mythology. And another thing that I had read, or I wouldn't have noticed it otherwise, you could also start reading the letters in this sequence, O-R-A-T, which is the root for oratory. So it has to do with speech and what we say out loud has an effect, and then that's interlaced with the tetragrammaton, which you were not allowed to pronounce, which is why they don't have the vowels to make that Yahweh. So it also represents the speakable and the unspeakable.
It's interesting, the tail of the swings is exactly as the tail in the strange card that we looked at last time.
Yeah, he's also got his tail tucked between it. Yeah, his legs like that
Yes.
as well. So that when we were talking about it was saying, when approached in the right way, he's harmless too. He doesn't want to bite you.
And the sword is pointing to the bird animal up there also.
Well, shall we reset the stage, or are there anything?
I just want to say that the eagle is representative of Zeus or Jupiter, which is interesting. That's pointing and going to Chesed, which is Jupiter, with that blue. So.
Okay, in the usual fashion, I will mute everybody and then so now I shall introduce Dr. Heller speaking on the Justice card.
The step that we take is from Tiferet Gevura, the 22nd path, which is characterized by the major arcanum, the 11th arcanum called Justice. And the Hebrew letter is Lamed, the meaning of which is the ox goad. The astrological sign is Libra. Now, justice, the card of justice is pretty much, except for one major detail, it is pretty much the image of the old Roman goddess Justitia, justice, whom you will find often enthroned, well, in sculpture form in front of the courthouse or something like that, because it's traditional to have that there. Nobody seems to object to these figures that come from antiquity and that we have in the courthouses. In any event, Justitia, justice, the old Roman goddess of justice, has the sword and the scales. On the scales they weigh the evidence, like old Osiris in the underworld, and the sword, of course, is the punishment that will cut off your head. But there is one significant difference. The tarot justice, at least in these better informed decks, is not blind. She doesn't have the blindfold over her face. So this is justice with wisdom, justice with insight, not just a kind of automatic justice that goes by the book. And so what we have here is, now we've got to see is what two spheres we are connecting. From Tiferet to Gevura. Gevura, that red sphere over there, is that's the toughest vessel on the tree of life. Mars is associated with it, and it often called the justice or even the fear, the terror of God, pachad, and it's filled with fiery martial energy. And so when we connect the balanced, beautiful, intuitive energy of Tiferet with this kind of an energy, then we come to a situation where clarity of judgment, not just judging others, but self-reflection, the ability to wisely and compassionately to judge ourselves comes into action. Most people are very ready to judge other people all the time. But when you are up here among the archetypes, you have to learn how to judge yourself, but also not too harshly. Because people sometimes tend to, when they get to be too condemnatory of themselves, they tend to forget that compassion is the law of laws, it's the universal law. You should also exercise compassion toward yourself. You shouldn't punish yourself too harshly either, even as you shouldn't be too harsh toward others. But definitely this is where intelligent self-judgment comes into play, a clarity of judgment. And when we do that, then we obtain what? A sense of balance. There are the scales. People who have no self-reflection or very little are always unbalanced people. And they're a terrible pain to be around precisely because of their lack of self-reflection, they are constantly projecting everything, especially negativity, onto others. Whatever goes wrong is always somebody else's fault. Never their fault. Never, never, never. And that creates a terrible imbalance. Just to be around people like that for any length of time becomes very disturbing, very painful, because all that projection is bombarding you all the time. And so it's very important to achieve that balance. Remember that in Kabbalah it is stated that the only evil is unbalanced force. Unbalanced force and evil are the same thing. Even good can become unbalanced and then produces ill effects. You can go overboard in some actions and some behavior and some thoughts that generally would be regarded good, but when you overdo it, you will cause processes to obtain which ultimately are counterproductive. And therefore, balance is extremely important in Kabbalistic terms. When there is no balance, you are likely to fall off the tree of life. Only a balanced consciousness can move to greater consciousness. Certainly, if you look into the writings of C.J. Jung, whom we have considerable regard for here, you will find that everywhere that without balance, there is no individuation. People go overboard in one direction or the other. They want to become terribly spiritual, and there is no grounding, there is no balance. One has to continue to take all the factors into account, the physical, the emotional, the mental, and so on, when you move toward the spiritual. If you neglect these, then bad results are going to obtain. And so that's a very important issue here. So this is the path, therefore, where we exercise and acquire self-knowledge in the sense of self-reflection. We begin to see our shortcomings. We are beginning to look at our own shadow side and try to balance ourselves so that the undesirable excesses of our nature don't run our lives any longer. Needless to say that when I mention law here, I don't mean an external law, not even the law of Moses. But it is the law of the Spirit, the lawfulness that is built into the very principle of our existence. Perhaps the Eastern term, which that also can be overdone, the concept of karma has some utility here, because it is not something that is arbitrarily declared in a book, but it is a working principle that exists within the process of our existence that has to be taken into account.
Well, the Justice card, as always, following Dr. Heller, it means just, taking crazy notes and having much greater insight and excuse me, into the card than previously. I appreciate the squareness of the crown and of the symbol on the crown and of the symbol on the breast of this, as well as a circle perhaps in between. Is that a sun inside the square? The sun in the place of the heart, that squareness in terms of balanced judgment that's not going to fall over, the right angles, the correctness, that kind of thing. This has got to be Masonic for days, Jeriel, so I'm looking forward to hearing your thing. And the open eyes. So that's the big thing that I will usually focus on. In terms of a divinatory interpretation, when this comes up as a summary, I mentioned before with the Wheel of Fortune, like the chickens coming home to roost or karma and things like this, or I was thinking it anyway. This is much more so that way. And I think it's also an admonition to open your eyes and not be silly or frivolous, that you need to be sober and wise. This is as distinct from, let's say, the distinctions between the King and the Queen of Swords are also here. The Queen is very one-sided, whereas the King is full-faced and the sword is a little tempered in this way. You have the sword very recto in Spanish, very, very upright. And but the eyes are open, and so that uprightness is correct and appropriate for the situation because it is balanced by the swords, and there are the pillars, and then this gorgeous, very radiant purple backdrop, which is probably hiding something. And so there are mysteries behind, and this figure in front is not sitting on a cube, but sitting on a pedestal, and 1 foot. So anyway, that's it for me in terms of, so in terms of divination, if this were in the advice against place, then I would say it might be against your intuition, but perhaps go with your instincts rather than going with the official wisdom on this. you don't want to be so hyper correct that you're not being compassionate or considering the circumstances of the situation, or you don't want to be so dogmatic, although that would be more like the Hierophant card. So I'm looking forward to hearing other people's interpretations here. If this is also, if this were in the negative position, you might literally be facing a negative judgment. You might be having a lawsuit. You might be having to, we read somebody who was having to determine the estate for their descendants. And so they had to figure out what was going to be correct, who was not going to squander it, who was, what was fair. All of those things are kind of in play here. In terms of the advice in favor of, then it would be to really make sure that you are taking into account all of the circumstances, that you are being open-eyed and fair, that you're not being arbitrary or vengeful or too forgiving in this case, because maybe if this is in favor, it's time for someone to receive the consequences of their action, and that would be correct. That they need a course correction, and you would be in perhaps the position to administer it, something along those lines. I'm going to mix it up a little bit. Michael, can I call on you?
Sure. I like this card. I kind of don't understand why it's 11 instead of 8. I kind of like the old school kind of version. But 8 and 11 both kind of play into each other, so a lot of the decks show it as 11. But Waite's version is really interesting. The green on her robe is very similar to Venus, and the gem on her crown and the 3 spikes, 4 + 3, 7, Venus energy. And with her wearing the green and red, there's that sort of balance again. If we look at the Tree of Life, she's right there in that middle area, which I think is fascinating. You get a lot of symbology in terms of weighing. I'm going to mention Cavendish again. He compares her to Mat, which is the Egyptian kind of weighing, the god who weighs you in the afterlife, and where you have to weigh your soul, and it has to be the same equal weight of a feather. You can see that in her equal measure there. And I do like the connection to the High Priestess too. 11 reducing to 2, and you can see that those 2 columns there, and sort of that background, just like the High Priestess has behind her. So a lot of interesting stuff. The sword being upright is really important to me too, because we have to be level-headed when we come to judging ourselves or judging others. Having that perfect kind of balanced ideal is great. So in terms of if I pull this, obviously, if it's in the favorability, or you're going to see, trying to make that balanced decision or that balanced justice, and maybe in the negative, something that maybe is a miscarriage of justice or something like that. But great card. How about Magnus? Go ahead.
Thank you, Michael. Much has already been said about this card, but we have already talked about it has a connection with the 10th we looked at with the Anubis and the scales here and everything. And she's holding the sword exactly as the Queen of Swords is holding the sword. But we are seeing that card from the side of it. Here we see it straightforward. And also the curtain behind her is interesting because it is lilac, and it's the Yesod Sephira, the 9th Sephira. And I think it has to do with also this, that she should rule with a foundation, because that Sephira is a foundation. It's the word for it is foundation. And I also see, as Michael did, the green for the Venus And I think it is also a symbol for she should rule with justice, but she should still have the artistical thoughts in mind. She should not be too hard on things. She should also look at the beauty in the world, I think it is saying there in some way. And we have already talked about the two pillars there, the connection to especially the high priestess. This is like the high priestess in action, I would say, in some way. And she also has a feet outside of it, and it's the feet, of course, of the pillar of severity. And also the blue devil in the crown is interesting because it is a reference to the Sephira Hesed, and it's something saying that a bit of Jupiterian energy is needed for ruling and making justice, but not too much, because the Mars energy is important here to be able to make the right decision, I think it is saying. And the crown also has 3 points of it, and I see it like a tree in miniature there with the 3 pillars, that she is in contact with herself with the tree, and still she has the outer pillar there beside her, like the high priestess. So it's an interesting card, and I think again all should read about it in the Wang book, because he has much to say about it. And also he is hinting about what we was talking about the last time in the septenary, that this is the card that balanced the septenary layout. And he's hinting about that because he talks about there is a balance in the balance of the card. And I think I pass to Yeriel.
Thank you, Magnus. I think one of the things that's really salient about this card is its position. It's square in the middle. It's numerically it's in the middle. There are 7 numbered cards before it and 7 numbered cards after it. And if you lay out the majors the way that we've talked about several times, it is right in the center of the the second row. And something else that I thought was very interesting is the sequence of the priestess, whose number is 2, justice, whose number reduces to 2, and then judgment, whose number reduces to 2 as well. And they're in a direct line from the in that spread where we have them in the 3 septenaries. And so we see the priestess with the mystery, with the potentiality, and then justice with the actual act of making judgments. And then we have the judgment card that is the ultimate justice of that sequence. Can we go back to the other slide where we're looking at the card again? Yeah, I think it's really interesting. This, of course, the positioning is exactly like the priestess card, and I think it's neat that in the right, the sword appears superimposed on the pillar of severity. The scale appears superimposed on the pillar of mercy. and the judge sits in the middle. And I think that stands for a very basic thing, that judgment should be severe where it needs to be, merciful where it needs to be. So we're looking again at balance, and of course this is the card where you actually see the balance. The Professor Heller, Dr. Heller, also mentioned the way that that these work, and so we have balance again. We also have a kind of an invocation of the Magician card, with the right hand raised and the lower hand, the left hand lowered. So we see that invocation of the higher and the lower. And the as above, so below. Getting into some of the Masonic significances here, of course, as I've said repeatedly, because it's repeated all the time in Masonry, that achieving the balances between the opposites is the primary principle that's being advocated. And the Masonic symbol that is associated with the master of the lodge is the square, and the message of the square is fairness. To you hear of a square deal, people dealing with you on the square. And the square I was talking about earlier, about how the horizontal and the vertical both are essential in building anything. And of course, the square is the thing that represents that both of those two things are attuned. We go back to the most basic and most ancient of spiritual symbols, the equal armed cross, where the vertical represents the relationship between the human being and the supreme being, and the horizontal represents the relationship between human beings and one another. And so that is also in that same symbolism. And looking at the two cards together really puts me in mind of the 30th degree of the Scottish Rite. That one's based on Egyptian mythology, and it involves a ceremony out of Egyptian mythology, where the person on dying appears, and the candidate is in that position in the ritual, and upon death there is a council of all of the gods, and they put the scales forward, and the individual who has died, their soul is in one of the pans of the scale, and the other has a feather in it. And if the thing is in balance, and of course it represents really an incredible ideal, because anything is going to outweigh a feather. But this is where they make that decision of whether you've done the right thing with your life and go to their heaven, or you end up being sent to the underworld, which is represented by that big red figure that's on the preceding card. Um, that's about all for now. I've got a couple of other things, but I think they'd be better off to come up in the discussion. Who still hasn't talked yet? Lana, have you talked? Why don't you go? You just remuted yourself.
Thank you for reminding. You know, I think there are lots of interesting things been said about this card, but one thing that I want to say that the position of the card, you know, of the person in the card, you know, it's she is sitting up straight and seems to be in a balance where we know that the sword is much heavier than the scale, you know, and symbolically, you know, the punishment, you know, I think the message that I get from this is don't rush into action, and don't judge harshly. Be objective. You know, find that balance. You know, because something that, you know, is done properly here, that we can't really tell which way she is leaning, and we know that definitely the sword is really heavy. You know, it's made of steel, where, you know, the scale not nearly as heavy. And don't be too linear. You know, don't be too harsh. You know, find balance, and the main thing is an emotional detachment. And it's also, from astrological point of view, it's between Mars and Libra. And Mars in the sign of Libra considered to be in detriment. You know, the conflicts, there are certain people that have an issue with conflict. You know, they try to avoid them in any way they can. And the other thing is that also it can indicate in the reading, you know, being able to resolve conflict diplomatically. And I think that's all I want to say, and I'll pass this to Ala.
Thanks, Lana. Well, I have more questions than my take on the card. I would be curious about all the colors that are here: the white, the red, the green, the purple, and the yellow, and the gold on the scale also. So if somebody would be later on in the discussion, somebody would address, would be great. And I think this card is also, for me, is to practice balance and discernment, which is so important in life. So, and I'm passing it to Christina.
On my card, I have a different color where it's an emerald, green emerald on the crown, which is brings that story of Lucifer is crowned with the emerald. And this is for me, that when I see this card, it usually is the cycle of force for might. What is that? I wrote it down. Might for right. Law of divine law and order is taking place. The cycle has been completed. Just wages are done. You know, now the cycle. Now you can start new. I like this card because whenever I see it, well, I like all of them. It's just that, okay, it's done. You've taken care of the divine law and order. Invoking spirit, she's holding in her right hand the active hand. So you're invoking spirit, and her left hand is the receptive, bringing it down to the balance of what you're invoking. I don't know. That's all I'm picking up. Allison, do you want to? Ella, did you go?
I did. I've just passed it on to you.
Oh, sorry.
Angela, maybe.
Angela and Brian, I think.
Yeah.
Allison.
I started us off and I said quite a bit, and I'm really enjoying what other folks are saying. Thank you, Christina. And anything from Brian and Angela?
Hi, same as with the card before. I'm listening and taking everything in. So thank you.
All right, then. I as a Libra, Sun, Moon, Neptune, and Saturn, that's all. I've always kind of mused at people say, oh, the balance. Yeah, well, that it can be a quite a dynamic balance, maybe not that severe, but you know, there certainly is motion in the scales. The thing is not locked at the axle there. It's a I consider it a constantly moving target, and so the act of assessing is the observation of the dynamics in dynamic play, that is to say, in motion. So I just wanted to add that little personal touch. But the scales, they tip, and they tip back and the other way, and I'm not sure that they ever really come to a rest. And but for divinatory purposes, of course, it really is generally all about really trying to get a very clear mind, a clear view, one that is not as clouded by the turbulent emotions as so much of, as we've seen in swords, so much of it is subject to a great deal of emotional turbulence. And again, the thinking function is not, it's on a very short leash. Emotions are basically in control. And I think this is when the emotions can get calmed, and maybe when the scales come close to a stop, but settle down. That's when the insight, the sort of the decisions or the wisdom or the insight needed by the recipient of a tarot reading, that's when I see this card come to play. Now, let's say as a cautionary side, that would be a caution against being too severe, or being, let's say, overly concerned with the exact judgment, that maybe spend a little less time judging and get up and move a bit to do something. So those are just my my minor additions to some great material that we've enjoyed here in our discussion. So let's pass it around.
Well, I'll make one comment here that probably the reason why the scales are the symbol for Libra is the first day of Libra is the fall equinox, when the length of the day and the night are equal. And I didn't comment on the divinatory meaning of this, and I think the most basic thing it is do the right thing, and seek what is fair, And when you get, as soon as you go down that path, you're back to, again, the golden rule. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Don't judge others harder than you judge yourself. Oh.
Jeriel, on your Masonic emblem behind you or on your backdrop, on the bottom is the carpenter square, is it not? Is it the compass and the square?
Yes, the compass and the square is the most prominent symbol in Masonry, and then whatever is shown in the middle can be seen with reference to the compass and the square, and we're taught that the square is to remind us to square our actions, meaning treat everybody fair, and the compass is taught for us to circumscribe our desires and keep our emotions in due bounds. And the thing that usually appears in the middle, like if you see a person wearing a Masonic ring like I do, there's a G in the middle, which a lot of people will say that it stands for God, and in English-speaking and German-speaking jurisdictions, that has a ring to it, but it stands for geometry, which is the science that of how everything in the created universe works together and fits together. But because we're a lodge of research, this particular one has the lamp of knowledge in the middle of it, because that's our mission, our self-appointed mission, to, within the Masonic context, always seek for deeper knowledge.
I think that's a good indicator with this card also, is to kind of look beyond the obvious, to look for the deeper reality, to look at the underlying dynamics of the situation. I had a question. We mentioned that weighing of the soul, and it should balance with the weight of a feather. Is there a feather on this scale? I was staring at my card and I couldn't tell if that is supposed to be like a reflective thing, or is that the little feather on the one that's furthest to the edge of the card? I couldn't really tell on mine.
Oh, I hadn't.
It looks like
thought
it's
about
a
that.
view of the platform, or whatever word we're using for where he's seated. Because I don't see any content really in either
right,
there
Brian.
that we can see.
It's reflecting the red on the left, and it's reflecting actually blue on the right, which would go
It
to
is.
that the back and
Yeah.
forth. But that's the wrong
Yeah.
path, isn't it? So the red and the blue, that would be more the wheel. Anyway.
And wouldn't that be the balance between Geburah and Hesed, with the severity
Yes.
and mercy,
Yes. It
which
will.
is definitely all over this card.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
I just want to point out that the NAP card actually has the lamps exactly like Gerald, the Masonic lamps on the pillars, each two of those lamps.
Oh, really?
For
Which
this
card
card.
is that? Which card is that, Michael?
The NAP Hall card.
I'm going to find it on that tarot website and see if I can pull that up.
I actually have, if you look at the document, I uploaded scans of the NAP cards on there.
Oh, that was you. Thank you so much. There is such a wealth of stuff on that Google Doc now. It'll take a lifetime to get through it, but it's great, everybody.
Right. So if anybody was interested in that.
And Allison, you had asked me, I think, in an email about whether what I sent could be put in that place, and you're welcome to.
Got it. Thank you.
I'm a little bit
question.
curious. I'm a little curious whether the sword is more ornamental in the Justice card than in some of the other characters.
Look at the Queen of Swords, because the sword is exactly the same position.
I'm thinking of, you know, maybe this sword is a little more of a symbolic ceremonial sword, jewel bedecked. But you say the Queen of Swords has a,
Yeah,
well,
but
they're very
it's-
plain. Don't want to use the wrong words for the hilt and the handle or the grip. But I wonder if there are any other swords that are quite so ornamental as this one that we have here.
You know, the queen, you know, her sword is supported by the chair. This one, you know, somehow managed to be in the perfect balance, you know, and sitting still.
Feather.
So I'm talking about building some, you know, muscle, and not just physical, but also, you know, psychological, you know, to be able to hold on to that heavy sword. You know, I think it's also maybe a sign of responsibility and knowing that, you know, you have a weapon, right? But you need to be very, you know, cautious with that weapon, because you're also going to be judged, you know, how you use that weapon.
And the queen is seated on a throne, and there are no arms on the chair here with the justice.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe it's only coincidence, but where the judge sits in a court is called the bench.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, so there's no support there.
Another thing.
I have a question. Maybe someone can enlighten me. You know, this tapestry behind her color is purple. Is it symbolic? You know, what is the purple color? You know, in the Kabbalah.
It's the Sephira Yesod, the ninth Sephira.
So that's the unconscious,
foundation,
right?
Foundation, yes,
Foundation?
the unconscious. Foundation.
And another thing just occurred to me, the study of law is called jurisprudence.
Huh, there you go.
So prudence comes into that, and that, as when we were discussing that subject, you know, prudence is thinking about the effect of something. And I do think that the sword here is more than just ornamental, because one of the things that judges do, the judgments sentence people to whatever the legal punishments are for their wrongdoings, and it's there on the pillar of severity, and that is the severity that courts have at their disposal, and they're supposed to temper that. So there's temperance again with mercy. So you see how those four cardinal virtues play upon and interact with one another.
And that sword of the justice is round up at the top, but the sword on the Queen of Swords is pyramidal at the top.
Yeah,
it's a tip of that sword. It's the justice is rounded, so it's blunt at the top.
The details on these cards are just astonishing, and how apt they are all to their particular card.
Nice.
And yet they evoke the idea of one another, and those little subtle differences like that come into play.
And I see something I haven't seen before, because she has green, the emerald green color. She both has above her red dress and under it, because you see also the arms are green there under.
So she's wearing some sort of a green tunic underneath of that red
Yes,
robe.
yes, she
And of
does.
course, the judge, when they're on the bench, wear a robe. Of course, the tradition is they wear a black robe.
Yes.
And when they condemn somebody in a British court, the judge puts a black cloth on his head, or her head in modern times.
Hmm.
I wanted
And-
to make a comment on the, I don't recall if anybody had commented on the blue stone or jewel in the middle of the crown. It just, I can't help but thinking of, in reference to insight or intuition, it looks like it's sort of in the position of the third eye.
Yes.
And so that's just something that keeps standing out to me.
And traditionally, the goddess of justice, besides being blindfolded, and here we see that the justice isn't blindfolded. The blindfold is supposed to represent impartiality, but I think that having her not blindfolded here means that that true justice means you should be taking everything into account when you're making these kind of judgments. And I think, and maybe you said this, Allison, when you were talking, I think her having the square and blue to be also, the squareness is again square and fair go together, and it's the color of the Hesed mercy Sephiroth. So that should be that aspect of mercy should be, and that last point that was made, having it in the position of the third eye, which is supposed to be the seat of wisdom, the wise thing and the just thing are one and the same. That's why King Solomon was considered to be Solomon the wise, because he was meant to be fair. Remember the cutting the baby in half, which was just a ruse to get the person who was trying to deceive the court to reveal themselves.
It's interesting that Christina's deck has the green for the color on the stone on the crown, which may perhaps indicate the loving aspect of Venus, or the creative aspect, to have creative thinking, or to be to have aliveness in your thinking and not dead thinking, something along those lines.
And the square with the red dot in the middle of the green there, I think it is the balance between the fourth Sephira and the fifth, the red, the Gebura and the Hesed. Could be a symbology for that.
I just noticed something when looking at it. The tassels, the green tassels that she's wearing, is kind of like, if you've ever seen a picture of Abraxas with Nos and Logos, you know, reason and intellect kind of being in balance there and being draped, something that somebody obviously in the position of justice or balance would need.
There is also on the right side of the red dress, it is some lines or something that is up at the arm. There are small scattering or shattering there if you are looking closely.
I think there's like tally marks.
Yes, and
Keeping
it's
count.
not on the other side. It's just on that side.
You know, her hands are very interesting. You know, if you could look at the one that's holding the sword, it's just, the grip is very, you know, hard, you know, holding it with a confidence, you know, where the left hand, you can see the position of it like it has, just has no weight in it. Very relaxed.
And I think it's interesting too that the tradition is, and we're going along with that this is a woman, but it's a very very much that's ambiguous here.
Androgen.
Yes.
Yeah, it kind of has a little bit of a bust line though. So yes, it's ambiguous, but I think it is hinted at, and the justice is kind of a female figure.
Well, and just as an aside, women have not been treated justly by the law for quite a long, long time in most traditions since the advent of the
Patriarchy.
the patriarchy, exactly, going back to in the earlier societies, they were matriarchies, which make a lot more sense. Women have much more of a sense of justice than men do. Men just want to win.
I think it's
Women
also
want things to work out.
interesting how the purple cloth, which is the unconscious, yesod, right? And symbolized by moon, which is putting your emotions behind and using more of your, rational mind, logic, with the sword versus the emotion. So,
And the cloth is almost covering out all the yellow, also the Tiferet color there.
Oh, and by the way, the esoteric titles of this card are the Daughter of the Lords of Truth and the Ruler of the Balance. And we didn't mention the esoteric title of the Wheel of Fortune, but that one is the Lord of the Forces of Life.
The purple on that background is, at least in the coloring on this card, very, very lustrous and looks like velvet. And that's a very royal, regal, it's a regal color, it's a regal fabric, it's a very, so I don't know if that just happens to be the coincidence of this particular deck and coloration, but that's, it has a lot more kind of depth and texture fabric-wise than a lot of these, but I'm a fabric hound, so I like fabrics.
And
Quilt,
in the courtroom, in a courtroom, the judge might as well be a king or a queen.
There you go. Very good.
Because they are absolute. In fact, their decisions are called rulings.
And that purple color was forbidden for everybody to wear once in a lifetime.
Only royalties could wear it.
Yes,
Right.
It was.
I thought that was a good observation you made earlier, Magnus, about the crown and the structure of the high points and the low points on the crown, being an echo of the three pillars of the tree.
Thank you. Yes, many cards is like that because we looked at the hermit the last time also, where we had the three pillars in the lamp.
In the lamp, right?
Yes.
Which is another representation of the lamp of knowledge, different than the one in the symbol over my shoulder here.
That one, I want to rub it and have the genie come out.
Yes, it's like a genie lamp. Yeah.
Which is very fitting for the Masonic magic.
Yes.
Well, folks, have we concluded our mission for today, tonight? Closing remarks from anybody, or?
So are we going to be on then for Wednesday, and we'll go forward with the Hanged Man and Death?
That would be, let's see, Hanged Man would be 12. Yeah, we've done 10 and 11 today, 12 and 13 Death. So that'll be some fun. Hangman, one of my favorites. And
Well,
So-
death does follow the Hanged Man, that's for sure.
Yeah.
If the rope doesn't break.
Usually.
Of course, if you're going to be hanged, it's a lot better to be hanged by the foot than by the neck.
Yes, and have your life force intact.
Yeah.
Okay, everyone, thank you so much.
Okay,
Thank you.
and
Have
a
Angela,
great rest of the
I'll
weekend.
send you those digital magazines too when we're done here.